Look at this footage of George H.W. Bush back in 1989.
This is crack cocaine. It could easily have been heroin or PCP. It's as innocent looking as candy.
This aired on national TV. Bush was holding a bag of crack as the President of the United States while he was sitting in the White House. And he got the crack from the Lafayette Park, a park that is right in front of the White House. This video doesn't even need an intro. Let me just explain the real life story of the time when George H.W. Bush bought crack from an 18-year-old drug dealer in the park in front of the White House and decided to talk about it on TV. Like, why? In order to explain the whole story, I will answer these two questions in this video. First, why did Bush order a crack purchase from the park in front of the White House? Second, who was the 18-year-old drug dealer who sold crack to Bush? And why the fuck he was selling crack in front of the White House? Let's start with the first question. Why did Bush buy crack? That's a crazy sentence. Let's go back to the 80s. It's 1989 and George H.W. Bush just became the new president. In the same year, 64% of the people saw drug abuse as America's most serious problem. Bush became the new president in the middle of the war on drugs. In the beginning of the same decade, crack was introduced to the drug market. In 86, crack was dominating the news. Time declared crack the issue of the year. So Bush dedicated his first primetime address to the nation explaining his strategy on how he will fight drugs and how he would join the war on drugs. The main focus of the strategy was basically more money on more law enforcement and more prisons. Bush and his team of speechwriters knew people were really scared of drugs and they were especially scared of the new drug crack. So his speechwriter team thought about something really dramatic to get people's attention and show how the drug trade had even been spread to the president's own neighborhood. Here was the idea. What if while Bush was talking about crack and how widespread it is, he shows a bag of crack that was bought from the park in front of the White House? This way you can show that crack is everywhere and no one is safe from it, and Bush could get the support that he needed for his anti-drug strategy. Bush liked the idea. He thought that it drove the point home. But in order to get the crack, they had to find a drug dealer that was selling crack in front of the White House. No one would do that. That's a crazy idea. It's like a fish looking for food inside a shark's mouth. So where did the crack come from? Well, here the story gets interesting. The White House contacted the Justice Department about getting the drugs. The goal was to find some crack that fit the description in the speech. But according to local law enforcement officials back then, there was almost no amount of crack sold around the White House, especially in Lafayette Park, which is the park in front of the White House. There was always too much activity going on there for drug dealers, and there was always uniformed police officers present there. There were about half a dozen arrests for marijuana possession in the park that year, but there was no records of crack dealing in the park, so they had to get creative. The Justice Department calls the DEA to solve the problem. This is part of the conversation that happened between two people in the DEA, James Milford and Agent William McMullen. Milford asked, "Do you have anything going on around the White House?" McMullen said, "I don't know about the White House, but he said there was an undercover buy his agents were hoping to negotiate 4 or 5 blocks away." Then Milford asked, "Any possibility of you moving it down to the White House? The president wants to show it could be bought anywhere." They couldn't find a drug dealer that was selling crack in front of the White House like Bush wanted. So the DEA decided to lure the drug dealer that was selling drugs to undercover DEA agents in other places to the park in front of the White House so they could buy crack from him in that park. Who was this drug dealer? His name was Keith Jackson, and he was an 18-year-old high school student who was a drug dealer. According to DEA officials, Keith had been the target of a 3-month undercover investigation before the White House request and had sold crack to undercover agents on 3 previous occasions in other parts of the city. DEA officials said that they have held off on arresting him in hopes that he would sell a larger amount of crack to undercover agents and could be charged with a more serious offense. When the DEA agents called him to set up the meeting in front of the White House, he said, "Where the fuck is the White House?" When the undercover agents told him it was the residence of the president, he replied, "Oh, you mean where Reagan lives?" So the dealer was an 18-year-old kid who didn't even know where the White House was or even who was the president. McMullen said we had to manipulate him to get him down there. It wasn't easy. At the time, Kevin Zeese, a defense lawyer who specialized in drug cases, said DEA's efforts to maneuver the suspect to the area around the White House may enable his lawyer to argue that he was a victim of outrageous government conduct. Zeese said this would not help his defense against the 3 earlier crack sales. Nevertheless, I think it's disgusting. He said the situation is not bad enough that they have to create a false situation. It's the government creating a hoax so they can rev up the war on drugs efforts. Regardless, according to the DEA, the meeting was set and Keith agreed to come down to the park in front of the White House to sell the crack. At about 11:30 a.m. on September 1st, the undercover agent met Keith Jackson and purchased 3 ounces of crack from him for about $2,400. Then the crack was given to Bush, and 4 days later, Bush did his speech. Later on, the 18-year-old drug dealer was arrested and sentenced to 10 years in prison. The whole point of the speech was to show that the crack was so widespread that you could even buy it in front of the White House, which was a lie. You couldn't just buy crack from the park in front of the White House. DEA lured a drug dealer to the park just so Bush could make a point. I get what he was trying to do. I get the point. But Bush literally lied on 144p. The problem is, all of these efforts were theatrical and just a performance. None of them actually helped with the crack epidemic. All the money that was spent, all the corny campaigns like the Just Say No campaign, which later research find that the campaign had small or no impact on youth drug use, did not help. The truth is, the number of people addicted to crack went down in time because the newer generation saw what crack did to the people before them and decided to stay away from it. Bush lying and holding a bag of crack didn't solve anything. It was just a theater for him to show to his fan base that there is a monster everywhere and he's the one fighting it, to get more support from them. But no, the war on drugs was just a failure.
Every president for the past 2 decades, Democrat and Republican alike, has declared war on drugs. And each of them has lost that war and lost it miserably.